Vanessa. How are you today? Good. All right. Okay, well, the clock's actually fixed now, so it's not running fast. That's good. Allow me to click home. All right. Shall this gleam da 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 da. All right. I hope everybody had a good weekend. Did you know that the term weekend didn't even exist until around World War II? If you actually listen to songs from that period, like Etta James' Sunday Kind of Love, you will find that they say very interesting things like, I want a Sunday kind of love because they work on Saturdays. Sunday was the only day off. Most people, right? So it was during World War II, right before World War II, that unions and other people had been able to get the work week decreased. And so two things came out of the end of World War II that sort of changed the way we think about the world: the weekend and teenagers. We also didn't have teenagers before World War II, right? Because we just didn't think of them as anything other than kids or adults. We didn't have an in-between space, right? And considering that at the end of World War II, it had actually only been like 40 years since children that were 8 or 9 years old were not allowed to work, right? Because back in the day, they used to send the kids to work so that they'd be productive. And, you know, kids have little hands. So all the machines they built back in those days were better for have kids crawling on. And also there's lots of kids, so when they got ground up by the machine, they could be easily replaced. This is the world we come from. It's barely 130 years that we've not been doing this, and we act like we've been doing it forever, right? Okay, so questions, comments, concerns, where are we at today? Any questions, comments, or concerns? Your next homework assignment is due tomorrow. That's the one where you do the etymologies and the definitions. And then for Wednesday, I'd like to make sure that y'all have read chapter 2 of Frere. And for your next assignment that will be due a week from tomorrow, the week 4 assignment, there's a video I'm going to ask you to watch by Henry Giroux, who is a devotee or a disciple or follower of Paulo Freire, like bell hooks. Okay. Today, what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of that history that, you know, I think that y'all should have. So we're going to talk a little bit about Socrates. Then maybe we'll talk about power and possibility. And if we have time, we'll talk about weird and what all weird is, what weird is. Actually, I'll tell you right now, just to let you know, weird is actually the Anglo-Germanic Scandinavian word for fate, not for strange. Literally, weird is the way things are supposed to be, not something out of the ordinary, right? Okay, so maybe we'll get to that today if we have time. If we don't, we'll do something with it on Wednesday. Okay, where to begin with Socrates? Socrates was a man he lived and he died. Okay, there's the biography. No. Socrates was an Athenian. He died in 399 BCE. Okay. Let me go ahead and just put that there so y'all see it. Socrates. He died 399 BCE after being brought up on charges by his fellow citizens, by 3 of his fellow citizens who represented different factions in Athens, who had found themselves at odds with Socrates, but more than anything else, found themselves at odds with some of the people who helped to support Socrates. Socrates himself was not an aristocrat. He was a free citizen of Athens. He was someone, therefore, who had enough money, either family or from his own work or whatever, to be a soldier in the Athenian army. Because back, again, less than 200 years ago, everybody was responsible that was made a soldier. You were responsible for your own equipment. It wasn't just given to you. Sometimes you lucked out and you had a king or a lord or a vizier or something who made sure that everybody had the finest equipment. But when Socrates was alive, especially, see, he was 71 when he died. So around 450 BCE, he was fighting. He at least had enough money to buy armor and spears and swords so that he could be occupied and go do this duty for Athens when they were fighting the Persians. So, so Socrates was a good Athenian in the sense that he was willing to fight for his democratic state. He was also a stonemason, so he actually had a trade, right? He's a craftsperson. Socrates might actually have worked on, you sometimes hear about the Parthenon, the big temple in Athens. It's still there in the middle of Athens. He might actually have been one of the people who worked on carving some of those stones. Socrates was also the son of a stonemason and a midwife. So one thing that Socrates often did when he was talking with people is he would use craft metaphors because he was a stonemason. He'd also use the metaphors of midwifery. He actually called himself a midwife of ideas, that he helped people give birth to their ideas, not that he came up with anything originally himself, but that he helped other people find their originality, find what they wanted to say, and then help them through the difficult delivery of their ideas. Okay. In one sense, Socrates is the poster child of philosophy, especially Western philosophy. He's the name that even people who don't know that much about philosophy, they've heard of Socrates, probably, right? There's actually a joke in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which came out before most of y'all were born, although they made a second sequel this last year, right? But anyway, in the Excellent Adventure, when Bill and Ted are going through time, one of the people they pick up is Socrates. And the joke, if you know it, is that Socrates is most excellent, which actually is something that Greeks used to say about him, that he was a man of excellence. He was most excellent, right? So what's the big deal with this guy? He doesn't seem to have written, though he at least had some rudimentary knowledge of how to read because he was known to read things, but he didn't write. Why is he important? Point out Buddha and Jesus also didn't write anything, but they're very important. So why is Socrates so important to the history of at least Western humanity? Socrates sort of is the first philosopher. Now, people will make the argument that, oh, there were philosophers before Socrates. I think that's totally right. There were people who did what I call thinkering before Socrates. And certainly there are people around the world in other cultures who do thinkering, right? But actually, Socrates lived at a time where he may have been among the very first people to even use the word philosophy. Okay. As you know from the first thing you read, philosophia, the Sophia was there, the wise was there, the philos was there, the friendliness, the right was there. But when they got put together, that would have actually been around the time that Socrates was kind of coming into his own, right? And one of the very first places that you actually see the word put down is in the histories of, not Thucydides, the other guy, Herodotus. So Herodotus, who's called the father of history, he uses the term. Herodotus was a little older than Socrates. Okay, so it's around this time, 420, 430 BCE, till Socrates' death, that people start utilizing this term philosophy. But what is it that's so interesting? Why is it that Socrates gets charged and then Socrates ends up being killed by the people of Athens because they find him guilty of some wrongdoing? Well, the things that he was accused of doing were promoting gods that were not the gods of the city. This is one thing that they said he did. All right. And the other thing they said he did was corrupt the youth. Okay. What does that mean? Well, when they say that he promoted gods that were not the gods of the city, it's because Socrates, when he would engage with people, he would tell them sometimes that he had this thing called a daimon, from which, of course, we get the word demon, but really it's just a spirit. And he said he had this daimon. Okay. What is this daimon? Well, the daimon actually was a discourager. When Socrates would be out and about in the agora, which is the marketplace in Athens, he would often be looking for people to talk to. That's what we like to do. We love to talk to people. They didn't always love talking to him because he always asked questions that made them uncomfortable. And for the really powerful, remember our conversation from last Wednesday, discomforted them because they're not used to being asked questions. And his deal is that when he would see someone and kind of lock on them, right, his superpower or the power that he was given by the spirit was, if he started to move toward them, the spirit would go, no, that's it. That was the entire interaction. Basically, the spirit told him this would be a waste of your energy and time, this person to talk to. Don't talk to them. Go find somebody else. And that wasn't like forever and always, right? It's just maybe it's a certain day or whatever. So he talked about this daimon, this spirit. So they were like, oh, he worships false gods, or he worships gods that the city doesn't recognize. And you've got to understand that back in those days, the city literally, if a new god came to town, if somebody brought a new god into Athens and they wanted to promote the worship of that god had to become a citizen of Athens. And it went through a process of citizenship to become something that would be worshipped in Athens and therefore have a reason for wanting to help Athens, right? So this notion that he has some spirit that he carries around with him and he's never asked anybody to help make it a part of the city and all that, people didn't like that. Then the other thing was they said he corrupted the youth. And the issue of corrupting the youth, what the hell does that even mean? Greg Abbott thinks that I corrupt y'all. How are you being corrupted? Paco and then Clinton.
Because I guess corrupting in their eyes is like teaching things that aren't part of the system.
Right. Okay. Clinton?
In a way, yes, but making us think more critically, question.
Okay. So there's two different ways that you can corrupt the youth in the eyes of some. Oh, Adam?
I think one with Socrates, this kind of journey started with like an oracle telling him that he was.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. I was actually just fixing to go there, and that's really good because the issue here is his corruption comes about, his corrupting of the youth comes about from the fact that you can either give information that people don't like, or you can encourage critical thinking, right? Among students, among young people, right? And there are plenty of people in our society who believe that young people should never be taught critical thinking. Don't look like that, Clinton. It's true. It's so true that it's literally a part of the Republican Party of Texas platform, that kids in school, not college, but kids in school should never be taught critical thinking because they believe they're not ready yet to be critical. And it's something that's allied with this thing. So what happened is Socrates was going around and he was talking to all of the business people in town, all the politicians in town, all the warrior strategists in town, the generals and whatever. He was talking to them all the time. Some of them were his friends and they welcomed the challenges that he brought. Some of them were acquaintances, and sometimes if they were in the mood, they tolerated it, right? And sometimes they really did not appreciate the fact that he was questioning their authority, right? So why did he do that? Well, it's what Adam said. A friend of his who was extremely enamored of Socrates had gone to the oracle at Delphi, which was the most important oracle in the ancient world in what's now current day Turkey and Greece. And he asked the oracle. Now you got to remember, oracles never give you straight answers, right? So he asked the oracle, is Socrates the wisest man? And the oracle said, there is none wiser. Well, what the hell does that mean? There is none wiser. So does that mean he's the wisest? Or does that just mean nobody's wiser than him, but that doesn't mean that he's the wisest? So you're right. So you always have to figure it out. Well, when his friend told him about it, he's like, that can't be right. It's because his first reaction was to kind of maybe read it as, oh, he is the wisest, right? And Socrates never thought that he was the wisest. So, right? And a sophisticos, as it would have been called in those days. And he said, so I have to prove the God wrong. Hey, there's another reason to think that maybe he doesn't worship the gods the way he's supposed to, because he's like, the God has said that none is wiser than Socrates. Socrates is like, I have to prove the God wrong because I'm not that wise. So what does he do? He goes and he starts talking to everybody that everyone thinks is so wise, that everyone thinks is so smart. The people who are successful in business, people who have been successful in politics, the people who have a lot of money, just, they were born into the right family. He talks to the craftspeople. He talks to the greatest writers of plays and tragedies and comedies. He talks to everybody. And he tries to figure out, because these are the people everyone thinks are the officially smart people, right? Mostly because they're successful. And so he goes and he starts talking to these people. And what he finds pretty quickly is that when he talks to craftsmen, they are extremely wise in their craft, right? Which you would expect. If you talk to a maker of ceramics, who's been doing it for 30 years, they know a hell of a lot about throwing clay and making ceramic objects, right? And sometimes They might even be able to make a metaphor out of what they're doing and use it to teach other people about life. So they do that sometimes. But generally, they don't go outside the realm of their knowledge. Then he talks to business people, or what we would call traders, traders, traders and people who do exchanges and things like that, who've made quite a reputation for themselves and a lot of money. And we still do this today. We think that because someone is worth billions of dollars, they must be good at almost anything. They must be smart at almost anything, right? And so he goes and he talks to these people. And what he finds when he talks to the business people, the merchants, is they're really good at making money. And because they're really good at making money or profits, they, for some reason, think that they can talk about anything, that they can tell you about anything, right? So he thinks that's not quite that wise. So you got the craftspeople who kind of stay in their lane, although they may develop metaphors. And you got the merchants who, because they're successful, they just bloviate on what the hell ever, even if they don't actually know the facts. All this should sound very familiar. Then he goes and talks to the politicians. And when he's talking to them, remember, at that time, Athens was a direct democracy. Okay, that means if you were a man and a citizen, you participated directly in the decisions that ruled Athens. Okay, not women, not children, not slaves, not foreigners. But if you were a natural born Athenian citizen that was a man, then you had duties to perform not only in the military, but in making sure that you were there when the assembly of all citizens got together and made a big decision for the city and stuff like that. So that doesn't mean that there weren't people even then who primarily were what you might call the officers of the city. And an office in the ancient world is not a space. It's literally an honor that's given to someone. Okay. So when you are invested in office, when you're given an honor to like be the person in charge of this portion of the city's decisions for 3 months, right? You actually have a vestment. It's called investing someone in power, because you literally have like a particular clothing that you wear that they give you so that everybody knows who you are, which actually makes you sacred so that you can't be touched, lest it cause chaos and disorder when you're wandering around the city. Okay, so he would talk to people like that as well. Now, as happens in any democracy, you have a separation between people who are dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, okay, and then people who are aristocrats, people from the well-born who pay lip service to democracy. Okay. The deal was with Socrates, he had some friends that were Democrats, some friends that were aristocrats. Unfortunately, some of the people who were aristocrats ended up becoming among the worst people in Athens, because Athens at this time, about 435 to 399, was in a war with Sparta. And the thing is, Sparta was primarily ruled by aristocrats and with lots of slaves. There were like 3 slaves for every Spartan. So they kept a strong stranglehold on all their slaves lest they rise up and do something. But Sparta and Athens got into a war that's not really worth going too deeply into, but it drew the entire Greek culture of Turkey, what's now Turkey and Greece, into the war. And at one point, some around 410, some of the aristocrats got control of the city and they became the 30 tyrants. A tyrant is someone who takes over with the help of foreign power. Okay? You don't get a tyrant. Plato tells us that you never get a tyrant with the people. That's a different kind of thing, right? That's a demagogue. So a tyrant is basically, or a group of them are basically rulers with outside help. And then a demagogue, this word's been thrown around a lot the last 5 years, is someone from the town, from the city, from the place they're at, who rulers with popular support. Okay, so what happened is some of the people that were friends of Socrates were family members of these 30 tyrants, including Plato. Plato wasn't one of the tyrants, but his family was involved with it. And what ended up happening is, as soon as they were overthrown and the Democrats got control of the city again, they were like, well, it's difficult to get them because most of them ran away or they're too rich. We can get Socrates. Okay. So they start this process around 400 of trying to find a way to prosecute Socrates. Now, what happened is that Socrates, actually, the tyrants themselves wanted to get Socrates involved in what was going on with them. So they kept trying to come up with ways that they could make him an accomplice to what they were doing. But he kept slipping out of it till finally they kind of backed him in a corner and they said, you have to go get this Democrat and you have to go with these people and y'all need to kill him because, you know, he's going to undermine this wonderful tyranny we've created in order to make Athens safe. And he just like doesn't go. Cowardly in one way, right? Because he doesn't, it's not like he tries to stop anybody. He just simply skedaddles away so that nobody knows where he's at for a little while. But then when the Democrats come back into charge, they're like, well, Socrates is a well-known face. People know him. He was friends with these guys. And so they kind of pile on to Socrates everything that they could think that would get him in trouble. And one of the reasons to do this was, and this is not too different now, the law just doesn't work as openly. They thought, okay, well, we can punish Socrates. And the way to punish him is to basically end up making him have to pay a really heavy fine, but he won't be able to pay it. But all those rich people who are still here, like Plato's family, will pony up whatever we basically want, right? And you're like, well, what's that got to do with anything? Because the people who brought the prosecution, if they win, got 2/3 of whatever the fine was. And so people were being prosecuted on the regular in Athens just to make money, right? And this happened in Rome, and it happened in Britain, and it happens in the United States, right? Okay. Socrates also was so popular that he was used in a comedy about 20 years before he died. A comedian named Aristophanes, and comedian, y'all do know that stand-up comedy, the way we think about it now, is also about 50 years old, that people didn't used to do stand-up comedy the way we do it now. Comedy was very different, right? So Aristophanes wrote comedic plays, which could be quite funny, but they also had morals to them, and they were trying to, like, you know, do something. Well, Aristophanes wrote a play called The Clouds, and he basically has a character in it named, and Aristophanes was a friend of Socrates, He basically has a friend. He basically has a character in it named Socrates, who runs a thinkery. That's the literal translation of the term, a thinkery, where he fills people up with information and all kinds of crazy speculative ideas and notions, and then they learn how to use this to get ahead in the world and to bend the law to their will, right? Well, that's not really Socrates, but that's actually people who didn't know Socrates very well. This is an image left in their head. So not only do they have this thing of being able to say, well, you know, he's got a bad association. He tends to piss off powerful people, right? And he also worships spirits that nobody else worships. And now we know also he seems to be tied to this crazy stuff where he's more concerned about things that happen in heaven and beneath the earth than he is about what happens in the world of people. And he also teaches young people how to make the worst cause look like it's the best cause. And there's a name for this, and it comes from this period, and it's called sophistry. Sophistry, which has a very negative connotation, is when you just accumulate a lot of information and then you put forward an argument that you may not even believe in and convince people that it's right. It's spelled sophistry. It's pronounced QAnon. Anyway, so you get this position that's actually not right. Okay, Aristophanes picked Socrates because Socrates was a popular name that people knew, but he was a friend of Socrates, and he didn't think Socrates was a sophist. But, you know, if you slap Socrates' name on it, people would kind of understand what's going on, because he's this dude that wanders around all the time asking people really weird questions, strange questions that make them have to defend what they know and what they don't know and all the rest of that. So when he gets there and he's in the trial, he not only has to worry about the fact that he has these new charges of worshiping a spirit that no one else worships and corrupting the youth, but that he is somebody who makes people be more concerned with what's happening in heaven or beneath the earth. And he also helps people learn how to make fallacious arguments that sound like they're sound, that appear to be sound, appear to be valid. That's a lot of bias. And the jury that hears the case is 500 people. So the way that they would set a jury is that they just, you'd be called, it's your day to do jury duty. They'd have 4,000 or 5,000 people show up. They'd actually be running 3 or 4 cases at one time. And they just split everything up so that there's about 500 people in each court. And you defend yourself, and private citizens prosecute you. And then jury of your peers, literally 500 citizens, decide whether you're guilty or not guilty, right? And there's also room for people to sit there and watch. So Plato and his family and other people were there at the trial, but they weren't jurors. Okay. What kind of things did he do that really pissed off people with power? He was associated with some people who happened to be cousins and son-in-laws of tyrants. But, you know, do you want to be judged by not by your associations, but by the family of your associations? Right? And then he's got this daemon thing, but it's not like he's going around telling everybody you should worship this daemon that I worship. He's just saying I have this spirit that I listen to. So what is it that he's done that's pissed everybody off? Well, that's what I was talking about earlier. He talked to the craftspeople, and he learned from them that they know how to stay in their lane, right? Because they're so good at their craft. And that's what they mostly care about. And they're not trying to make everybody be a ceramic maker or a stone mason or a rug weaver or whatever. But then merchants had this tendency once they became successful to believe that they could always provide an answer to any question, that they always were able to solve any problem. And politicians just don't like to be questioned about their authority. I think we all know that. So he pissed a lot of people off. By doing things like this. Clinton, what really matters to you? What? I'll just make something up. This is just for shits and grins. I'm trying to be Socratic. Family? Ah, family. Family is very important. Why is family important to you?
Become who I have to or want to be.
Depend? What is this depend? I've never heard of depend before. How do you mean depend? What?
Maybe I used the wrong word, but
I just don't know that word though. What is the word depend?
depend.
What does it mean? How does it mean? I'm ignorant of depend. How does depend mean? You used it, so I'm assuming you know what the word means. I don't know what it means. I didn't use it. And please don't say it depends, because that would be kind of shitty.
When I say I depend on family, what I mean is family in a metaphoric way is the pillar to my life. Support whenever I have an issue.
So your family, when you say so dependence has something to do with support? Okay. How do they support you? How's the support? How is dependence support? You support them? Or you merely hang on? So dependence goes both directions. Sure. Yes.
So for now, I depend on
just keep saying the word until I know what it means. Now, this is the reason you piss people off, because they use a word that every fucking body probably has a meaning for, right? And then they would be, he would be like, I'm ignorant of that term. I don't understand how you mean that. Like somebody would say, virtue is the most important thing. And Socrates would say, what is virtue? Quo est in arte. What is virtue? Are you going to tell us? I thought I was going to give us the answer. You're just trying to become a merchant. What is it? What's the question?
Because it is not on there, like the Socratic Values, and I saw another Thyself, but I was not, so did he talk about what he meant by no?
Socrates, so we're fixing to get into the Socratic Values now that I'm getting y'all to see how he pissed people off, because people, and this is I piss people off this way all the time too. There's some people who get really pissed, but most people just get angry. I don't ever talk to anybody powerful enough to be worried if they get pissed. So people get aggravated when you stop them and you're like, I don't think I understand how you use the word freedom. How do you mean it? How do you mean free? How do you mean, right? So this is how he got everybody either was like, this dude's so awesome, because look at what, especially if you're young people, 14 to 19-year-old boys running around town, and Socrates, they see Socrates just cornered some merchant that's always an asshole to them. And he's asking this merchant, what does it mean to merchant? How is merchant? How does trade? And they're like, and the person, and they get more and more red faced. The kids watch, They laugh, they point, and then they run and they start doing it to their family, and they start doing it to, that's how he corrupts the youth, see? He gets them to ask questions of people who they're supposed to know they should never disrespect by being critical of the things they say. So what happens, of course, is that he ends up being convicted, and they're waiting for him to say, well, I don't want to die, so therefore I'll pay a fine. And then, of course, they ask him to state what he thinks the fine would be, because they're going to try to do some kind of like barter thing, right? Where he'll start off kind of low, 1,000 drachma, and they'll be like, 10,000 drachma. And he'll go back and forth for a little bit. And Greeks love to barter. What do you think he says? He says, I think that I've done a public service to everybody. So you should, feed me for the rest of my life in the public buffet. Because they had a little spot in the middle of the city where anybody who was an Olympian winner or a great hero, they would go there and they could eat all they wanted to eat every day of the week. It's like, I think you should just give me access to the buffet for the rest of my life. They're like, first time they realized we may not get as much money out of this as we thought we were going to get. No. So everyone's harumphing. The jurors themselves are like, do not take this seriously. And he's like, okay, I take it seriously. Right? And so he's like, I'll pay a fine. What do you think? I'll give you a nickel. He said a drachma, whatever a nickel is. Nickel. I'll give you 5 cents. That way you'll have some sense. I'll give you 5 cents. And he said, and they're like, and the dudes are like, wait a minute, we're not going to get any money. This is starting to go, they begin to see, hey, I think I see where this is going. And then everybody gets so pissed off at him. First, we're saying you should feed me for the rest of my life and keep me and my family fed. No, I'll give you a nickel for all the trouble. And then they're like, death. Because he's like, I won't go into exile. Because that's the only other choice. Pay a fine, go into exile, or death. And he's like, Athens is my home. I'm a child of Athens, and I refuse to leave. And they're like, okay, death. So that's what happens. And I'll get into what happens after the death sentence and all that some other time. Now let's try to start looking at the reason why he's still remembered. 2,400 years later, right? Why? Because he challenges authority. But more than anything else, because he puts forward in the demonstration of his own life what I like to call the Socratic values. There are 5. Know thyself. Probably heard that. Notice soton. Know thyself. The unexamined life is not worth living. I know that I do not know. Knowledge is virtue. Knowledge is excellence. And then this one, which is not quite as pithy, direct communication with others is better than obsessing over the written or recorded musings of a supposedly wise person. It's very ironic, actually, that we spend so much time talking about some of the stuff we talk about, especially with Socrates, because it's kind of this instead of direct communication. What actually he wants to kind of put forward is that the place where loving struggle, as Jaspers would call it, philosophizing happens, is in this attempt to understand each other, right? Some people just don't want to be questioned, right? Know thyself. The unexamined life is not worth living. I know that I do not know. Knowledge is virtue or excellence. Direct communication with others is better than obsessing over the written recorded musings of a supposedly wise person. And then for Socrates, and I would say for Jesus and for Buddha, this is so true, they write nothing at all. And it's only the people who befriended them and followed them and thought, oh, this is important and maybe it should be recorded, that it actually got recorded, right? Or at least remembered. Know thyself. There's a lot going on there, and Isabel's is right to ask this question. Did he actually say what knowing is? Yes. It's virtue. What the hell does that mean? Do you think, Isabel, since you asked, what do you think virtue means? Excellence. A what? Achieving a certain result. So knowledge is achieving a certain result. Actually, I like that. Or what? Are you going to change your definition until I said that? Okay. Oh, you know what? One of the problems that we often have is we think something needs to have a long definition when really all it needs is something short. Because the longer you get it, the more the devil gets into the details. So let's just stay with that for right now. And if we need to improve it, this would be a very Socratic way of doing it. Since Isabel knows what knowledge is, because she knows what virtue is, and she's told us what virtue is, getting results, right? Let's kind of go with that. All right. Getting results thyself. What is the virtue of knowing thyself? Can you really excel if you don't know yourself? Adam shakes his head no. Why?
I think his whole point of all of this, knowing the knowledge, virtue, or excellence. I mean, the saying is you have to have virtue or excellence to achieve happiness, to have, be the happy so you can be,
Okay.
know yourself. That's all.
What result do you get from knowing thyself?
You are exploring the unknown.
How do you know you have a self if it's unknown? Now you've thrown me into a conundrum. Why did you throw me into a conundrum? We were making such good progress. How do you know yourself if yourself is unknown? How do you know you have a self? Vanessa, help us, please.
That's why you have to discover it.
Yeah. Discover. What does that mean? I've never heard that word before.
So it's discover it means to go on an adventure with yourself.
They always told me when I was 14 not to do that. Well,
Not technically.
not technically. Believe me, it wasn't technical at all. It was very horrible. So what? I never somebody throw things at me. I'm saying what? How do we know a self we don't even know we have? Clinton and then Isabel.
I believe in knowing oneself. It would be easy to say, I know myself, but yet we are full of the word I'm going to use. Please don't ask me. Is we have potential. We don't know the full extent.
We'll get to that in a little bit then. That's good. Potential is the Latin word for power. So we have power.
We don't know the full extent.
What power do we have? What were you going to say?
I was gonna say, it's like what you said. that we know, well, the only thing that we know is that we do not know. So basically you're committing to
Right.
exploring.
Okay, so these actually kind of fall out of each other. We skipped these two and went down to here because that's kind of what we do. It's like, let's get to where we're going. Know thyself. Obviously, that means an examined life. If you don't examine your life, right, then how can you know yourself? Now, that's a good question, though. I can actually say I have a life, but how do I know I have a self? Poor Clinton just gets so aggravated at me. How do I know I have a self? How is there some self evidence? That's a logic joke. I'm sorry. Is there some self evidence of self? Is there an evidence of self? Yeah, Paco.
I mean, when we're born, what we really have is a consciousness
Mm-hmm.
and motor functions that we don't really know how to
Okay.
control ourselves.
How do you know you had a consciousness when you were born? What do you remember from your birth?
I mean, I don't remember my birth, but I'm pretty sure the experience of I guess you could say traumatic experience of being born.
And definitely it's a traumatic experience because you get squeezed through something really narrow and your head looks really weird at first.
Yeah, so probably that experience is somewhere in here that I can't access.
Maybe.
We can't access our full.
But how can you know that?
I don't know, but that's.
So you just assume.
That's true.
You know what? If you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. Do I assume that I have a self?
No.
Think. The word is think.
Well,
The word of the day. What is it?
What I'm trying to say
I get it. What?
basically, knowing yourself is like as you develop more of your senses and more of these things,
Okay.
essentially you're connecting the consciousness to the physical, to the mental, to like all the parts of you, all the components that make you, and that's where you begin to know yourself.
Okay. That's good. Now, that means that knowing yourself is actually being in relationship to what's not you. Or else there'd be no you. That means that you make a differentiation between you and not you, right? Here I am, here's the table. But where do I really stop and the table starts? Right? So that's an interesting thing. I was watching Legacies, which is a spin-off of the originals, which is a spin-off of the Vampire Diaries. Isabel knows what I'm talking about. And so I got finished getting caught up on Legacies, and I went back to watch the originals because I realized I'd never finished it. And there was a beautiful description of what happens in Legacies. Someone's fixing to turn into a vampire, so you have to die with vampire blood in you. You're like, what the hell has this got to do with anything? Let's get there. You have to die with vampire blood in your veins to become a vampire. And the person asks, what's it like before she dies? And the other person's like, well, it was explained to me by this other vampire this way. First, there's nothing. It's just blank. It's nothing. Then you know there's nothing. Then you're aware there's nothing. And that's when you're starting to wake up. That's when you're becoming, right? And it's a really nice philosophical point. There is consciousness is awareness, right? That's why I ask you, how conscious are you? You have perception, but do you have what we philosophers with our wonderful terminologies call apperception? That's not perception of good apps. That's actually, it's only got one P in it. That's not, yeah. Apperception. You have apperception. What's apperception? That's perception that you're perceiving. That's awareness of your own awareness. Right? So when you're in a coma, you actually may be completely unaware. We don't have any idea. It's kind of like Paco's right before you're born thing. When you're in a coma, Do you have consciousness? Are you still in consciousness? Are you dreaming? Do people in comas dream of full life? Maybe, who knows? I mean, they don't seem to have certain electronic functions and electrical functions. That doesn't mean they don't have an awareness. We just don't know. But really the issue here that I think you brought up, Paco, that's really good for where we're going with this notion of knowledge and results and examined life, is the idea I isn't there at first. And that's because I is the ability to control your body. It's born from the ability to make your body move and do things. You don't have to have an I necessarily, especially in our society, right? The I can be so muted that the person's just on some kind of life support. They're not actually able to do anything. They're all but a vegetative state. We call it vegetative, right? But some philosophers and psychologists and neurologists posit that the I is actually something that comes into being as you get more and more control of your body. Results. Right? And this is what I was talking about before, whenever I've waxed on nostalgic about beautiful babies and how they start off not able to control themselves, and slowly but surely they learn how to control themselves. And every time they make an advance in controlling their body, you see they have more personality. Right? But this is an interesting issue. How do you understand self? How does self mean? We just take for granted that we have a self. We just take for granted that we have an I. We just take for granted that we have an ego. We just take for granted that we have a mind. Talk about something that we take for granted, right? How do we self? And that's the sort of thing where it's like, if you ask yourself, if one speaks to one inner and says, how is it I walk? And you start thinking about walking and all the things you have to do to walk, you will begin to not walk very well. Because walking is actually about not thinking. Yeah.
I think that's why like meditation is just so key, because it's like you're controlling your breath, so you're kind of like pacing yourself.
Right.
Pace yourself mentally.
Exactly. It's very important in a sense. So know thyself and the unexamined life is not worth living. If you just take for granted that you are who you are and you never examine yourself, you never examine your life, right? You know those people. They're fun sometimes, but mostly boring. Okay. I'm not trying to be an intellectual aristocrat or snob here. I'm just simple because there's lots of people I know in the academy who really don't question much, right? The unexamined life is not worth living. I know that I do not know. So this is the kind of super important point here with Socrates, is if, okay, first, know thyself. Next, to do that, you have to examine your life. But once you start examining your life, what you're going to find is there's a whole lot more you don't know than you do know. There's a whole lot more you do not understand or comprehend than you do understand or comprehend, right? But I want you to look at the structure of this sentence, because generally the people who accuse Socrates of corrupting the youth on down to today, people still think that he corrupted the youth. The first thing they say is they believe that he had a negative philosophy, that his philosophy was one of ignorance, right? Of making everything negative and making people believe that they don't actually know anything, and so leaving them with nothing behind, right? But if you look at this statement, either in Greek or in English, or the original Klingon, I know that I do not know, is a positive statement about a negative aspect of your being in the world. I know, positively, I know, I do not know. That's a positive statement. That is a statement where you can begin to live your life. Yeah, Paco?
I think number 2, well, I don't know if when you did this was in order or something.
No. This is just me kind of pulling stuff out of 32 Platonic dialogues and trying to make sense of it so that y'all don't have to. I'm here for you.
Okay, the reason I say that is because, like, if you live an unexamined life, then you probably don't know that you're living an unexamined life.
Yes.
Because ignorance is bliss. So you could pass away without knowing that you lived an unexamined life. So it would have been, you get what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, no, I get you. I get that. In fact, there are those people who say that what we're trying to get back to is that kind of ignorance is bliss sort of state where we can let go of everything and not, have to do all this examination. Really, if you look at this in terms of kind of the history of humanity since 400 BCE, and then all of the kind of confluences of ideas and sacred traditions and methods and technologies that we've come up with, really the issue is you kind of go through all of this to just let go of what's unnecessary so that you can then, right? There are some people, and I think that this is where maybe sometimes we lose sight. There are some people actually who are very humble people, but they actually are very profound in examining their own life. But they're so humble, they don't talk about it and they don't share it, but they really go deep down into thinking about what it means to be themselves and the people around them, stuff like that. So that's something to kind of keep alive too. And when Socrates says, I know that I do not know, this is actually, and the reason I put it at number 3 is it's kind of the axis for a lot of the work that he did, right? Is he would say, I know that I do not know. This is what's called Socratic ignorance. But the Greek word is irony. This is literally the Greek word for ignorance. Because I know that we've all been tainted in some way by Alanis Morissette's song, Isn't It Ironic? And almost nothing in that thing is ironic. But irony is actually something out of Greek theater, and it's the ability of the audience to know what's about to happen while the people that are involved don't. In the play, people that are involved in the play don't. And Socratic ignorance or Socratic irony is to say, I know that I do not know, and what I know that I do not know, it's possible you do not know, and let's just see what happens. Because I'm kind of thinking we're going to find out that we don't know anything. And that's one of the reasons people get pissy, because when you look at the Platonic dialogues especially, there's literally, out of 32, there's 4 or 5 that come to a conclusion. They almost always end in puzzles. They end in a moment of saying, I guess we don't know. We'll have to come back and think about it some more. Right? You start off, when you talk to Socrates, beginning to talk to Socrates, you start off thinking, I know what excellence is, it's results. after 30 minutes talking to him, or an hour, like I have no idea even what the hell any of it means. I don't know. I'm totally more turned around now than I was when we first started talking. That's the kind of thing that really makes people want to say he's a negative influence, right? Because he makes you realize you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And for some reason, there are a lot of people who would rather be wrong but sure than just unsure. And now we're back to my definition of philosophy is willingness to be uncertain and will to ask questions, right? If you're uncertain, you keep asking questions. If you're certain, you don't really have a lot of reasons to. You know. But now you get down here to the knowledge is virtue or excellence. Knowledge, and we said we went along with this idea that it's results or having results or getting results is the ability to accomplish something, right? And obviously, this word virtue, we still kind of use it the way they used it a long time ago. There are the virtues. There's, you know, being just, being courageous, being pious, being generous, being you know, I have so few of them, I don't remember what they're called. Well, there's more, but you know, we know the virtues are these things, right? And the opposite of the virtues are the vices, right? Overweening pride, gluttony, lust, right? And think about it. The word vice is the root for the word vicious. So someone who is without virtue, someone who is without excellence is a vicious person, right? A lusty man can be quite vicious, right? A gluttonous person to themselves can be very vicious and to other people. An overweening pride, right? A pride that doesn't actually, it's not backed up by the truth, can be very vicious, right? Pride cometh before the fall. Yeah. One of the reasons I put this here at this moment to talk about the Socratic virtues when we're talking about, we've been talking about dear Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire is a kind of Socratic figure. He got his ass in a lot of slings in Brazil because he was trying to help poor, uneducated, illiterate peasants and natives, right? To do what? To ask the people with power, what do you mean development? What do you mean independence? Right? Or how do you mean? So here we are, right? So with this notion of knowledge is virtue, let me show you one of the beautiful accidents of English, because you know we haven't done very much etymology today. Good heavens, you're probably like, what's going on? Is Maggie sick? He's only maybe done one etymology. This word in the old days would have been pronounced cano, not no. The K becomes silent over time, but you know, English speakers are kind of dumb about not changing. Anybody who's got English as a second language, you know that English is a horrible language because it makes no sense. In the sense of the way that sometimes stuff's spelled and the way that it's pronounced, right? Like hiccup. How do you spell hiccup? That's how you spell it. Hiccoughh. Hiccough. Hiccough. It's a cough. It's a kind of cough that sounds like a hic. It's not a cup that sounds like, it's not a cup full of hicks. It's a cough that sounds like a hic. Hiccup. Right? But yes, we do mostly spell it now with the UP, so you're not wrong. Okay, so a long time ago, this would have been cano. This would have been connect. Okay. Now, what do know and so what do know and connect? What do know and night have to do with each other besides this beginning letter, which is the word can, ability. So to know is to be able. Therefore, it's to get results. To be a knight is to be able to accomplish something. Someone who gets results, right? A knight of virtue is a knight who knows how to get results. But that's an accident. There's nothing, there's nobody who sat down and were like, we need to plan this into the English language so Socrates is proved to be correct. But I think that it's one of those little accidents of English that's very telling. If you really stop and you ask, why do I want knowledge? It's so you can do things. I don't want knowledge for trivia reasons. I have a lot of what most people would call trivia, but most of the stuff that I have that most people would call trivia, that's all interconnected and interdependent inside a whole theory of human history for me, right? To know is to be able. So to know thyself would mean what? In this, and then this is not necessarily what Socrates meant, but we're playing with it now. I want y'all to play with it from the point of view of our 21st century and our ability to learn new information. Know thyself, if we now know that know means ability to, or the ability to be able. What does know thyself mean, Isabel?
To be yourself.
To be able to be you. Clinton wants it to say that it's a kind of control. That's a possibility. To know thyself is to be able to be yourself. You can't be yourself if you never examine yourself, though. You can't be yourself if you never examine your life. And your life is this intersection of whomever you may be and all the rest of it. Notice here, though, it's not the unexamined self is not worth selfing. What does it mean to live? How is life? I don't mean that in the question, like what you do this weekend. How is life? How is living? Yeah, Isabel.
Let's say to exist in the present moment. Because if you're because when he says, well, it's interesting because when you think about examining, it's you could examine the present moment, or you could be examining things in the past, and then you're not really living because you're in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
So.
What's an examination? I don't know. Let's look up the etymology of examine. How about that? I need to encourage y'all to be doing stuff like this anyways. So, etymon. Again, I want to point out the etymological fallacy. The etymological fallacy is the notion that a word has to mean what it originally meant when it was first brought into the world. So I don't ever want y'all to think that I just believe these words mean what they meant 2,500 years ago and they can't have evolved. That's not how language works. Okay. But there's something that occurs if you now in 2021 can learn something about a word that's been around for way longer than even our civilization. That helps you kind of get into the history of how the concept got to you, right? So if we go to etymonline.com, which is a place I asked y'all to visit to do the homework that's due tomorrow. HTTPS everywhere. Why would that even be on here? I don't understand. Proceed anyway. It's unsafe. Adam Online's not an unsafe place. That's weird. Yes, 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 I know. Yes, 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 I know.
Hey, hold on. Did you put the right?
Yeah, I know. Hold on a second. Whoops. Let's mess that up. Start over again. I don't even understand that. I've never seen that come up here. Back over here. Back over here. Okay. It's very strange. Online. There we go. Ah, okay. Examine. That's not the right word. Yay, Johnny got there. Put someone to question. Inspect. To survey. Ex agere. X out. To set in motion, drive forward. To do, to perform. So basically it's to bring out of something. To examine is to bring out. So we could go back to our cloud storage here. Whoops, go to drive. Good God. Problem with technology is that it's technology. All right. There we go. And we're back. Okay, so here we are. Okay, so the unexamined life, the life that's not drawn out, the life that's not brought out. Brought out where? Yeah, the one you're not aware of, but where are you bringing it out into? Into light. Right? So long as you're not aware of it, it's in the dark. It's not a discovery, which is an uncovering. It's a covering up. The life that is not brought out into the light is not worth living. And the first step to that is recognizing that you don't know most of the things you think you know, right? This is the reason why most of the stuff that we call knowledge is not knowledge. It's hopefully a well-done opinion, or it's information, but it's not knowledge. A well-done opinion is very, I mean, I know that not everybody likes their opinions as well done as I do, but I like my opinions to be pretty well done. A right opinion is an opinion that has some kind of something to back it up. It's not just pulled out of your ass, right? The Greek word for pervert and perversion is literally basically to speak out of your ass. It basically means that when you talk, you fart. The perversion of knowledge is just, you know, farting out a bunch of information that actually has no good sense behind it, right? So I know that I do not know. I am able because I see where I'm unable. Yeah.
So in a way, what makes Socrates so wise and made everyone else so uncomfortable is because he showed everyone how they weren't wise. Like he basically exposed.
Yeah. And remember, by the time he reaches his trial, he realizes, okay, I'm not the wisest person, but I do know this. There is none wiser than me. So he's not saying I am the wisest. He's saying there's none wiser, meaning that the issue is there probably are a lot of people who are as wise as Socrates, right? but there aren't any people wiser than Socrates. And what is wisdom? Well, Sophia, of course, is the Greek word for cleverness. We translate it as wisdom. And I think that this is in that thing, right? Wisdom is one of those doom words that comes to us, right? Wisdom means doomed to see. And can you see in the dark? Hardly. What if it's totally pitch black dark? No windows, no nothing. Can't see, right? Without the light, you can't see anything. So to be able to be yourself, you have to bring out into the light your life, right? Or else what you're doing isn't worth living. But if you do that, the first thing you'll begin to realize is that I'm able to recognize in myself that I do not have infinite ability, that I don't have everything, right? And then if I am able to get results, right? And results in this sense are to excel. What is excel, Vanessa? And don't say a Microsoft program. What is excel? To excel. Perfection. Yeah, to, right? It's to be out. There's that X again, right? Every time you see this word EX, it means out, from or out, right? To sell out, not sell with an S, but to, to just break out, right? So ability is the ability to break out. That's the result you're looking for. Break out of what? Out of the darkness. The darkness of what? The darkness of your self-ignorance. And how do you do that? Not by studying a dead book.
What's a dead book?
Well, a dead book really is a book that you put in your hands. You don't know anything about it, but you think that it's full of wisdom. The 48 Laws of Power. The Bible. It's dead if you don't actually engage it in your life. It's just words on a page, right? But the thing to remember here is this: the written word, that's the first way we recorded things. Until about 130 years ago, all recording was graphic. We either wrote it or we drew it. And Socrates and Plato, maybe it's Plato, but I don't think so. I think that Socrates thought this too. But you're always in this kind of battle when you're reading the Platonic dialogues. You're in a battle to like try to figure out, is this Socrates or is this Plato, or does it matter? Right? But the main point of the dialogues actually is not to get you to spend all your time reading Plato's portrayals of Socrates, and you stop there and you don't do anything. Is to get you to recognize I need to be engaged with people in what kind of speech? Frank speech, right? And so direct communication with others is better than obsessing over the written recorded musings of supposedly wise person, of a supposedly wise person. Yeah. Say that one more time.
Sometimes, I wanted to give like the elder are the ones who are wise. And some of them are pretty.
Some of them are pretty dumb. Well, really, it's more this. It may be that they're kind of some elderly people that still have all of their, mind. We're not talking about the demented, but those with minds. Sometimes they don't seem to be all that smart. But there's one thing they have that most human beings don't have. They've seen a lot. They're wise because they've seen a lot. They're wizened because they have a lot of years under their belt. So they've seen a lot of shit, right? And sometimes that's very helpful because that means that they have at least information that might help people who are better at taking that information and turning it into something useful, right? That's the major reason. Another reason is, especially kind of like what we were talking about last week, in the traditions of people who keep alive connections to their ancestors, the wise, the elders are usually the last connection to ancestors that most of the young people would never have even known, right? So it's a part of a chain, right? Not the great chain of being where, you know, we start off at a molecule and we end up with God, but the great chain of life, which kind of runs around in a circle of life, right? And it goes in this kind of way where, you know, my great grandniece, Theodora, who was born this last year, and my grandnephew, Javal, and my niece, Karen, and my brother, Granville Paul, right? There's a lineage, right? Theodora will never know my brother because he's dead. So I have a duty, having seen him, to give her knowledge that even his mother, that even his daughter and his grandson don't have, right? Because I know all of his dirty secrets. So that's an aspect of it. So that's a part of it. So we have also a duty in this to help bring into the light what can show up best in the light, right? I don't like to think about the bad things that my brother did, right? But I will not act like he didn't, because those things he did have a direct effect on my niece and on her son and on his daughter, because they're in the line of these things that my brother did have reverberations, right? And sometimes an older person who's seen a lot and who's seen those things happen can come in and say, oh, no, I remember this, that's this weird thing you're doing. That's a holdover of when your dad did this, right? Or like when I remember, you know, right? Not to make the experience of racism about me, but when I remember those times as a kid when I watched a Black family be forced to eat in the kitchen. I'm not that old, y'all. Right? I'm not that old. There's so many things that we act like have gone away, or we act like have not been this way for a long time, when everywhere around you there are people who lived through it. And this, of course, is another problem that we have here. Direct communication with others is better than obsessing over the written recorded musings of a supposedly wise person. Please read Plato. Please read Frere, who's dead. Please read the Bible and the Quran and the Buddhist texts, and read all those things. I want you to read all those things. Talk to old people. Communicate with old people. Yes, you may be, they may say things that you don't like, right? They may be more racist, more misogynist, more, more homophobic, more whatever, right? But the point is, you need to communicate with them, because if you communicate with the elderly and we see their wisdom as that they've seen things, then you begin to get a better understanding of exactly why we still have problems that we thought we'd gotten rid of, or we still have problems that are pretty major that we thought had been lessened, right? And if you got an opportunity, if you don't have somebody in your life who's really old, and you're in good shape and you're vaccinated and you're willing to wear a mask, go to an old folks home and volunteer and talk to people. Right? Just talk to them. Oddly enough, some of the ones you want to talk to have dementia. No. You want to talk to them for this reason. Even if they have the dementia and have no idea what happened 15 minutes ago, they have an incredible, clear memory of shit that happened 60, 70 years ago. My mother had dementia, a severe dementia, the last 2 years of her life. And she had crystal clear memories of between the time she was 8 and the time right before I was born. Just crystal clear memories. And then after the period from after I was born until the day that I would come visit her at the home, she might not remember anything that happened. Right? She never didn't recognize, she always recognized me. So it was never an issue. She may not have any great memories of stuff after 1964. Her memories might be mostly 1940 to 1963, but they were really interesting. And I learned about a lot of stuff that I had no idea had happened to her because it was not something that she would have talked to me about. So this is a really important thing because it also allows you to hear oral history, maybe of your family, maybe of your city, right? So you go and you talk to them, but you also try to develop this direct communication, talking to people, asking, especially your friends, the loving struggle shit that I'm always talking about. The loving struggle shit, it's the fertilizer of love, baby. Yeah.
So you can say that the elders are the ones who keep, I'm going to bring like the keepers of the past.
Yes. Yeah.
And also, when you hear, because we need them to understand the past, but why do you keep repeating history? It's like you haven't learned from what they
Right.
say.
Yes. This actually is alive in the traditions of many people, but there's a European philosopher named George Santayana who said something that's often misquoted. And his quote, though, is, "Those who do not know the past are doomed to repeat it."
Is it Churchill?
No, George Santayana. And I mean, I think Churchill has a variation of it, but let's not let him appropriate from, because he certainly helped the appropriation game. But what does that mean when we say that? I'm fixing to move us into power now, because everything we've been talking about is power. What's the Spanish word for power? Anybody? Spanish word for poder. Okay. Poder. And the Latin word is potens. Potential. Huh? Poussoir. Yeah. How do you spell it? P-O. B-O-I-S-I-R. Pouvoir. Yes. Power. And you see actually how the English word power comes out of this French. Right? Because you can just kind of see it there. You actually have to remember that the W that we now pronounce "w" originally was a "v" sound. And that's the reason why W is actually two V's next to each other. And the original, this was, I know we're getting off, but I you just got to think about this. I've seen a lot. Y'all take what I've seen. The V was the Latin U and the Latin V. If the Latin word had a consonant after it, it was pronounced like "u," and if it had a vowel after it, it was pronounced like an F. Okay. This W came into being when the Romans met the Germans. And the German W to this day still is a V sound. Okay. Okay. So actually, what you've got here is two V's together. See, which is a W. So that's how you get the English word. Okay. So how do we understand power? Pow, pow. Pow, pow. Grab him by the balls. Is that okay? Yes. Power. Power. What is power? How is power? How is power, Paco?
Actually, we're gonna say that poder, which is power in Spanish, also means poder as in like can do.
So it actually is, again, we're back to the notion of ability.
Yes.
And there's a word here then that we can make use of in English that comes to us from Latin, and it is possibility, which means posse habilis. It means the ability to grasp, the power to grasp, actually. Possibility is the power to grasp. And you know, posse, you know posse, right? Y'all watch lots of Westerns. What's a posse in an old Western? It's a crew of people that are deputized by the marshal or the sheriff to go look for somebody. And it's actually, the name of it is the posse, I think it's posse comitatus. Anyway, it's a group of people who are empowered to act like they're, for a little while, to act like they're officers of the law. So posse habilis, possibility. Jaspers wants us to recognize, I know it's been a long time since we talked about Jaspers in a sense. Jaspers wants us to recognize that to be human is to be possibility. Yeah.
I just realized, since we spoke about B and W, I usually read Jasper, not together, just say Jasper.
Oh yeah, you use it. Yeah. Most people pronounce it Jaspers or Jasper when they first see it. But yeah, it's a German name, so it's it's Jaspers. But Jaspers believes that we are possibility. In fact, he has a term which we might have talked about for a little bit. And it's obviously, it's related to the Latin word that we all know and love and use on a regular basis. Jaspers, put that down there. Naspers. Jaspers talks about what he calls existence. And you're like, oh, is that existence? And it's like, yeah, it is existence. But he uses it in his work. So when y'all read those two pieces from him, whenever you saw the word existence, if it was mundane existence, it was the German word Dasein, okay, which actually means being here. And when you saw the word existence by itself, it was this, existence. And the thing about existence with Jaspers is, a good way to put this would be that the essential process of being here in the world is the possibility of standing out. And existens, which means existence, is the Latin word for, there's that X again, out from. It's the Latin word for to stand out. To stand out. When you exist, when I say this board exists, it stands out, right? Because now suddenly you're focused on it, it pops out of the background, right? But now what about yourself? If think about what we were playing with all of these Socratic value things. If the ability to be yourself begins with, right, getting your life to stand out for you so that you can see what you don't know, what you're not able to do. But this is a really beautiful thing. Your not ultimate, one of your greatest abilities is to recognize you're not able. Well, I'm not able. Can I become able? Sure. Depending on what it is, right? Depending on what it is. Can you become able? Sure. Because able is just, can you grasp it? Habilis. Right? Can you grasp it? If you can grasp it, then yeah. This is one reason that some people become really they become really enamored with the gym because you see results, right? You know that all you have to do is to learn how to do the exercises and you're able to have a healthier or at least a fitter body, because the two are not the same, right? And so because it has that materiality to it, anybody, including me, who's very unemployed in the gym, anybody could start going to the gym 7 days a week doing different kinds of exercise. We don't always do the same thing. I know that much. You don't always focus on something. You go to the gym and you do whatever, right? And the more that you do that, the more able you become. You can go farther, longer, faster, and pick up more weight, which is weird in a society where we don't really have that many jobs where you pick up heavy things, but it looks good. It shows you how strong you are, right? Okay, so power. And so in one sense, we actually kind of like, we seem to kind of like, I don't want to make too many, universal statements. We seem to really like this notion of what we're able to do. We love power. Now, obviously, power has lots of meanings. It's one of those equivocal terms, right? The power of a president is not the power of a weightlifter, right? No matter how much, they want to act like they can use those kind of metaphors. I've taken a heavy load on my back, but I'm going to push it up. I've been doing my squats and I'm ready to take on the problems of America. So, it's nice metaphor or simile. It's not really very good, but, people, we get into these languages and everything, but the issue, of course, is that we know there are different kinds of power. So if possibility is the power to grasp, right, there are some powers within our grasp, and then there are some powers that we can recognize that are not within our grasp, right? It is not within your grasp to veto a bill from Congress. That is a possibility for any human who's elected president. It is not a possibility for just anybody, right? It's not a possibility. It's not a reality for just anybody. What else can we say about this? The essential process of being here in the world is the possibility of standing out. is really, in a sense, the power to grasp how you can stand out. Now, a question here, of course, would be, how often do we see ourselves losing our grip on power? Today, when I sat down outside to do a little bit of work before class, I do actually prepare. I opened up a thing. I was like, what's frank humanization? What the hell is this? I don't recognize this. It was in my Google Drive. And I started looking at it and I was like, what? It sounds a little bit like me, but I know I don't remember writing it. When your mother had dementia and you in your 50s, you begin to worry that you're losing your grasp on things sometimes. You know? I panicked for 10 seconds. I was like, did I write this? It literally sounds like me to a certain extent, but not exactly. And then I decided, wait a minute, I do have within my power the ability to see who the creator was. And then I realized it was Andre. And it was something he and I had been working on in mind walking together. And I'd forgotten about it, and he typed it up. And I was like, oh, thank God. I thought I was losing my grasp on it there for a second. But how do we gain or lose power? Can you gain, now this would actually be a very Socratic question. Can you gain a power that you don't have yet? Or do you have to already have the power somehow? It's just not being utilized. Yeah.
You have to have the belief first, or like the goal.
Okay.
What type of power it is that you want, or what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, I guess it's a foundation, because you can lose power depending on what that power is, because the people that put you in that position, or that helped you get to that position,
Okay.
take away that ability from you. So it's like
But so now you've already just moved out into the realm of power like we normally mean politics or community. But earlier you said that a child is born with consciousness and they will begin to become more conscious. Isn't that a power they already have?
yes. So yeah, in that essence, because power,
Okay.
like we said, it's
Right.
many different
All right.
variations.
Good. So in political structures, obviously there are different kinds of ways that you can lose your power. Communal structures, social structures. Isabel and then Clint.
I'd say that as long as you have the ability to create change or have an impact on something that you have.
Okay. So power actually has something to do with change. Okay. Or at least the potential to change, which of course that's kind of like saying the power to change, but yeah. Okay, good. Clinton?
If I don't get this wrong, but I believe what he's trying to say when he says that people take it from you. At the beginning of the class, I think we spoke about who you are, who I am,
Yeah.
in relation to the table.
Right.
Where do I end and where does the table start?
Right.
I'm not sure that, but it might be what he means when he says the people take it from you.
You talking about Paco?
Yeah, I mean, really, it was just like fresh on my mind. I was really just thinking about the Travis Scott incident and what happened in Astroworld.
That's horrible. I'm not laughing that happened. It's just horrible that happened.
Yeah, no, and that's what was fresh on my mind.
Yeah.
I was just thinking like the power that he has in his position as an artist or as a
Right.
influential figure can easily be taken away by the same people that put him there due to the actions that
Because they've already started to sue him.
Yeah, he already has lawsuits.
And so he's canceling all of his I'm not saying he's being canceled. He is canceling his future shows because right now he needs to circle the wagons and figure out whether or not anybody's going to actually be able to demonstrate that he has some liability. Apparently, he kept going even after people had been telling the security guards and everybody that people were getting hurt. He kept performing. So is that because he didn't get the message? Is that he got the message and didn't care? So this is partially part of the reason that some people are saying he has some kind of liability. But yeah, so there's something like that. Actually, this goes well with the stuff we were talking about with Freire, right? Prescriptions by oppressors disempower you. If your greatest power, right, is this one, to stand out, the essential process of being here in the world is the power to grasp how you can stand out, but you've already been pre-prescribed a very small room you can work in, that you can move in, right? You've been, in a sense, disempowered. So this is the reason that so many of the people who get revolutionary, they talk in terms of the power of the people, power to the people, power to the oppressed, power to the blah, 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 right? So a question then becomes, and I think people have been asking this question for a long time, but in our own civilization, Euro-American Western civilization here, as a product of it, the last 300 or 400 years, the question has often been, how do you use the power you have, right? So that you don't lose the power you have. That's kind of the question in democracy. Yeah.
Also take a look at the power becoming structures.
Think about bell hooks, right? That's a good one. Or the power structures in your own family, like, yeah.
Like there's father, the mother, and also there's children.
Yes.
We can say there's the power in there because both the kids are under authority.
The kids are under authority. The kids are at best a promise. I believe the children are the future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. So, yes, they have potential, but they are kept on a short leash, literally sometimes. I've seen kids with leashes. It's crazy shit you see when you go to a suburb sometimes. It's like, that woman has her kid on a leash. like, and she's letting her Labradoodle run everywhere. What the hell? Okay, anyway, I'm sorry. Very much these structures around us are limits. Now, for Jaspers, for Freire, for Socrates, for Buddha, for Jesus, the question is, how many of the limits have authenticity, right? It's something that would help almost any human. And then how many of them help only a few people? And they're imposed in order to control as many people as possible, right? Remember, one of the things that happens with Socrates is he's literally teaching young people how to be critical. And that, again, I think I've told y'all this before, but maybe not. I never know when I have or haven't shared something like this. The Greek word to judge is kritain, which of course is the root of critical. To critique is to make a judgment. So Socrates is teaching the youth by example, how to be critical, how to make judgments. But as Vanessa's just pointed out, a lot of people don't want kids making judgments, right? And this actually is a part of that system I was talking about, I think on Monday, of the infantilizing of people of color, indigenous people, foreign refugees and immigrants, children, obviously teenagers. The reason we call them teenagers is we want to infantilize them, because 150 years ago, a 15-year-old could start their own house and household if they wanted to, because they just go out and get a job, start farming, doing whatever they wanted to do. We don't do that anymore, right? So this infantilizing process is a way of saying, you know, to women, to people of color, to poor people, you know, like, again, you know, if you're sitting there and you're like, it seems like everybody has some kind of oppression. Yes, you're right. Even if you're white from a middle class background, more than likely you've been infantilized in some way, shape, or form. Because you don't have a job. The fact that you're in school, don't they infantilize you a lot of times if you're in school? Still, you're going to college, but you get infantilized. Oh, that's not the real world. That's play world. You know, when you get out in the real world as an adult, right? So this infantilizing happens. And what's the deal with the infants? Now we're really kind of talking about infants. Why do you infantilize a teenager to make them infants? Why do you make them infants? They have the body of an adult, right? But you want to say they have the reason of a child. And when you do that, they can't make decisions for themselves. But then you do that with any group, poor group, you know, like one of the things you often hear about the poor is that they just don't know how to make good decisions for themselves. Just can't imagine. They own an iPhone, but then they need help buying groceries. You know, that kind of thing, right? Also, the infant at least has a good reason for not knowing who they are. But an odd issue about infantilizing is a way of oppressing, of putting limits around, right? Is if you really push the kind of people who benefit from all that infantilization and who benefit from putting those limits around most people. If you push them like Socrates did, they'll throw a temper tantrum like a 3-year-old. Because there's a lot of projection. Yeah, sure. If the people who benefit the most from infantilizing the poor, women, people of color, blah, 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 you know, not having the ability to make decisions for themselves, the people who put the limits around it and benefit from those prescribed limits that Freire's talking about, or that Socrates is challenging, if you do like Socrates and you push them and you question and you critique, you're critical and ask critical questions, they often will get to a point of getting so upset that they throw a temper tantrum. And we've seen this, Adam, in television, watching people challenged by the notion of teaching race in Southlake schools, and they turn into blubbering kids. I can't believe that you're trying to make my children racist by making them realize that America has a history of race. I don't understand. That makes no sense. That's literally cuckoo crazy. Just having a meltdown, right? And it's like all that's been done is saying, we just want to teach history. Oh, you're going to make my kids hate me. How the hell is that possible? Why is that the case? Right? So you get into this really weird place, right? And that's an example on the right. It happens on the left as well, right? I'm not trying to like just do fairness or whatever, but I've seen everybody who benefits from the power structure pushed far enough will act like a petulant child. They'll either throw a hissy fit, they'll lose their cool, they'll become violent. Sometimes children don't know how to use words and they just pick up a block and they hit somebody with it. That kind of shit happens, right? So one way that we gain power is by recognizing that we have more power than we thought we had. So it's actually not gaining power, it's gaining an awareness of the fact that you have power. One way we lose power is by trying to control other people. Yeah, it gives you some power, but it also begins to, by what I was just talking about, right? The social justice warrior who falls down and can't handle the fact that it's not a safe space, or on the left, or the social justice warrior, because that's what they are, on the right, who has a complete and utter meltdown at a school board meeting, right? They just lose it. So the thing I want y'all to think about between now, I'm fixing to call roll, pretty much know everybody now. So the thing I want you to think about now and Wednesday, and while you're reading the Frere chapter 2 and working on your definitions and etymologies, do you agree with the statement, knowledge is power? And conversely, is power knowledge? So think about it. Think about it. Knowledge is power, power is knowledge. Do those two statements mean exactly the same thing? That's where we'll start, I think, on Wednesday, as we begin to talk about chapter 2 of Frere. Okay? All right, let me do roll now. Get out of all of this stuff.